Welcome to Bold Voices, Good Yarns. I'm your host, Ian Henzel. Behind every book lies an author's life story. So join me on an interactive journey as we step between the pages to explore how an author's life and their experiences have shaped the stories that we cherish and love. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of joe or a cocktail, and join me as we step between the pages. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ian Henzel, and I'm the host here at Bold Voices, Good Yarns. We're going to be stepping between the pages of the life of author Michael Reed. But before we do, get comfy, grab a cup of joe or a cocktail as we sit back and step between the pages of Michael Reed's life. So welcome, Michael. I'm so glad you could join us.
Thank you for having me.
So Michael, for everyone, is the author of it's more of a horror thriller, gay horror, LGBT horror thriller called Desperate Measures. And in Desperate Measures, we have the main character, Rhonda, and her son. So Rhonda has an abusive husband who's terribly abusive. And what is the son's name, Michael? Joey, who's terribly abusive to Joey. And for Thanksgiving, Rhonda decides to escape with Joey. They're going to go to her sister's for Thanksgiving and then just not go back. Unbeknownst to them, the abusive husband decides to follow them. They end up going into a dark and mysterious woods, and the weather gets bad. There's snow, and they see a cabin in the woods that they go to take shelter. And in the cabin is a rather mysterious older woman. And unbeknownst to Rhonda, her son Joey, and Rhonda's abusive husband, there is something out in the forest, and it's not very nice. And I'll leave it from there. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So, before we were on camera, we were chatting, and you said that do you mainly read horror and thrillers?
Yeah, probably more thrillers than horror. I mean, I love horror, but there's a lot more thrillers, seems like, out there, and they're quite good. So
now, what was it that prompted you to start writing your own horror thriller?
it's always just held an interest. When I was a little kid, my parents divorced when I was 7 because my father was abusive, not like the character in the book, not to that extent, but wasn't very pleasant. And my parents got divorced, and we moved from the Pensacola military base up to my great aunt's house in Rockville, Maryland. And it was this big Victorian house, 16 rooms and all that. And so kind of set the stage. I just, there were always
perfect setting.
People always want to know, is it haunted? Are there ghosts in the house? What do you see? Are you afraid to sleep there? Kind of thing. I never was, but I've always had an interest in it. And that
was the house haunted?
Huh?
Was the house haunted? Were there creaks and groans in the middle of the night?
The house is 100 years old, and so it was always settling. There were a few unnerving moments in it. My brother and I were playing around in the upstairs hallway after bedtime, which was a no-no, but Mom wasn't up there, so that downstairs was dark, and we heard footsteps coming up the stairs, and very slowly. And we thought at first it was the house is just settling, but it was actual somebody walking up the stairs. And we freaked out and ran into the bedroom and shut the door and basically hid under the covers. And it was never resolved. I have no idea what it was.
When I lived abroad, I lived in the UK, and I lived in Bath. The flat I rented was, a few hundred years old. And I've never particularly put much stock in that sort of stuff, but in this flat, the entire time I lived there, I felt like I was being watched. And I've not felt that in other places I've lived in. So these things there are more things in heaven and earth.
Seems like.
Right?
Yes, I had a similar experience to that when I worked at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado for 5 years. That's the hotel where Stephen King stayed when he got his inspiration for The Shining. And there's parts of that hotel that even the maids wouldn't go to by themselves. for the same reason, just that nothing really happened, but just an overwhelming feeling of you weren't the only one there kind of thing.
So, you started talking, that you grew up in Pensacola, Florida, and you left
Yeah.
when
I was
your
about
mother
7.
separated from your father, who you said
Yeah.
was abusive. Can you share a bit about how your upbringing shaped your worldview?
Well, I have to say I was incredibly relieved when we moved. It was just always there was just anger in the house all the time at my dad's with my dad there. And we moved to Rockville, and household was fairly liberal. My great great aunt, was just this wonderful old woman who invited us into her house. We lived there for 8 years, and just growing up there, mom was going to school there, and so she was involved in the theater at the college there in Rockville, and later, a couple of years after we moved in, a couple of those people were boarding in the house. So we were kind of we had this, actors coming and going kind of thing. It was a very interesting place to grow up in an environment. I mean, it was very safe.
So for Joey, it sounds so Joey is abused by his father.
Yes.
And how much of yourself did you put into Joey?
Some, I don't know, have a percentage, but just I think I started his character out as me. There's a lot that's not in the finished book that just stuff trying to put down everything I could think about him, and so it started with me and our experience living with my dad and all that. But then, and I've heard, I've known people who've had much worse experiences than I did, and it just started to snowball as his character and the environment that he was being raised in.
Was it your experience that led you to write the story?
Oh, kind of. That's a hard one.
I mean, because there's a
That story came
folkloric
about
aspect
because I
to it
had a
as well.
picture in my head of a mother and son out on a road, and a policeman was there, and they were saying, "Oh, we were trapped in this house down the road." Isn't actually in the book because I've changed the landscape a bit, but the policeman's like, "Well, there's no house there. There's just an old burned down cabin," kind of thing, and that was the first picture in my head of the story, and then I came up with Ida, who was one of my favorite characters I've ever written.
Who's the old lady who lives in the
Yes, and originally she was elderly.
in the cabin? Yeah.
Yes.
When did you start becoming interested in writing? Were there any pivotal moments growing up that made you think, I want to be a writer?
Probably 9 or 10, I started with just writing stories. Reading was a big influence. When we moved up to Rockville, my grandmother, who lived nearby, was emphatic that, we should be reading books, and she was an art teacher. And she used to come home with boxes of books that had picked up at the giveaway or the sale at the book depository for the county library system. And so there were books everywhere in the house of all varieties and for all age groups. And so it was just constantly going through and finding something wonderful to read. And then the natural next step of that was wanting to create stories.
Now, as an adult, you said before we started the show that you read the horror thriller genre. Did you read that when you were younger?
Not as much. In my back, once I started into adolescence is when I got into more of the horror genre. My first horror book that I ever read was Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House.
Oh, fabulous, fabulous
I was like eighth
book.
grade, and I was like, oh, this this is what I have to do.
And the first version of the movie,
But yeah, the
the
original,
first movie version of the book,
yes, from the 60s.
was excellent. The remake,
No, the remake.
I think they did everything wrong
Yeah, it
because
doesn't even
the
need to
book
be
is
mentioned.
atmospheric. I classify The Haunting as the scariest movie that I've ever watched, and nothing happens.
Yeah, and that was what made it so brilliant. It's acting and some sound effects, and that's it.
So what
And
other
some
things
interesting
attract
camera angles.
What attracts you about the genre?
I've thought about that in the past, and I'm not sure I understand why. Of course, looking around at the world these days, there seems to be enough horror there already, but there's something different about the story where you're in there, and I guess you're being part of the characters in their head and understanding what they're going through and relating to it to a certain degree, of course.
Well, in Desperate Measures, your novel, there's a folkloric aspect to it. The entity that's in the woods. Where did that come from?
That came completely out of my head. I'd done some research. My grandmother I mentioned earlier, aside from bringing home books, she used to take us out to all the folk festivals and things, especially over here in West Virginia and some in Maryland and down to the Smithsonian. We were down there all the time, and it was just always there. The Foxfire books that she brought us home, which were from the 70s, I think. There was some college students going around and interviewing old people, elderly people back in small mountain communities to document their lives and how they did things and all that. And those were fascinating. And so I've always had this like interest there, but I couldn't find any legend or whatever that would quite fit what I wanted in the story. So
So is it an amalgam of legends or
I mean, you could possibly, but no, I don't think so.
now you live in
I knew what I needed this thing to be and do, so that's what
now
that's
you live in, I believe, a small city, small town in
small
West
town, yes.
Virginia. Small town in West Virginia. How does that influence your writing?
Well, I wrote that book here when living in this house that I built.
Oh, you built the house.
Yeah. My
Wow.
husband and I bought this property 16 years ago and coming out on the weekends just started building and then finally moved in and we're still building. That was 15
So
years ago.
you actually built a house.
Yeah, I mean almost every part of it came up the hill in the back of my pickup trucks.
I just find that I'm as urban as you can get. I've always been very urban. I remember there was the satirist, Fran Lebowitz in her book, Metropolitan Life, and I'm going back to the mid 70s. I always identified with what she said that the outdoors is what you go through to get from your apartment to the taxi. So I've always
I
I've
think I've heard that
always
quote before.
yeah, I've always felt that way. So the notion of somebody actually building a house is quite remarkable.
Yeah, and there's nothing around us. I mean, there are neighbors around, but nothing you can't see any of them from the house here.
So how does it feel? And I'm kind of, so you read horror and thrillers, and a lot of things are set in houses. The place is a character, because places have histories.
Yes.
And how does how does your environment influence or shape your writing?
Which environment?
Well, you're in your own home, and how does home and hearth have an influence on writing?
The house here factors into it in that it's my safe place. So I can look out the window and see the rocks and the trees and the hills and the mountains and that go on and dark hollows and all that. And I can explore those just from sitting, looking out the window and write it. But I don't, how did it influence it? I'm not sure, other than, look out the window and it's the same landscape that's in the book.
Hmm. Probably a bit different than if you were looking out at a concrete
Yes.
jungle. It being immersed in the atmosphere. Um, in the novel, in your novel, Desperate Measures, Joey is abused by his father,
Mhm.
who hates him, who
Yeah.
suspects that his son is going to be gay.
Yes.
I mean, Joey's rather young, and a lot of us knew at an early age
Yeah, I did.
that we were different.
My first crush was in first grades
Really?
on
Tell me
another boy,
about it.
yes. But this was in a Navy, military, everybody it was all military, so it was I knew this was not something that you say out loud.
Was your crush on a fellow student or on
Yes,
some
yeah.
sailor?
Freddie, I think was his name. I think I can say that. I just in 1970, I think, yeah.
It's interesting because, I remember I can't say that there was a sexual aspect
Yeah, no,
to
I
it,
don't there wasn't anything that like that, no.
but it
Just
was like a
I saw
fascination.
him and I just kinda lit up inside, and that's how I felt.
And I remember watching the kids' television series, and there were a lot more live, or, there was a good balance of live things and not animated. And as I said, and our younger viewers will not remember it, but the Mickey Mouse Club and Spin and Marty, which took place on a dude ranch. I never, it wasn't something I could identify as a physical, but I always wanted to be best friends
Mhm.
with them and have overnight parties, slumber parties, I
Yeah,
guess, with them. What was under it didn't get articulated till many years later. So
yes.
did you experience that same difference in your family, that Joey experienced in your family dynamics? Was that
Even I was very closeted with my family growing up. It wasn't until I moved away, that I came out to them. Not that they didn't know but I did it was not something that was talked about, and there was always clues of different you'd hear a comment about, either being called queer or not me personally, but them talking about somebody else or, "Oh, that's bad," or just everything was always in a negative connotation.
so? As LGBT people, we often experience the world as an outsider.
Absolutely, yes.
How has that made its way into your writing?
Seems like most of the characters that I come up with are from my perspective of that not being part of the group, you know, the status quo, whatever. They're always on the outside looking in, or just running away from the everything else because it's too hostile.
If you could talk to your younger self, what advice would you give your younger self?
How young? I could have come out sooner, but, it is what it is, that regard. I should have gone to school sooner, to college. I should never have continued after high school. I didn't go to college right away. I worked up at this I lived in Colorado, and I started working up at all the ski resorts, and I worked in Estes Park at the Stanley during the summers, and then I moved to Alaska, and it
Wow.
wasn't until after several years up there that I started going to a college at the Kenai Peninsula College, which is now part of the University of Alaska.
Did you study writing or create writing in
I
school?
English in general, but the only creative writing class that they offered was canceled due to lack of participation. There were only 2 people that signed up for it, me and one other person, so the professor came to me and said they had to cancel it because they couldn't afford to do that.
There's a great leap to go from idea to actually writing a book. And a lot of people often tell me, I have a great idea
Mhm.
for a book. And I try not to be dismissive, but the difference between, having a great idea is one thing,
And
fleshing out a full novel
it's a lot
is
of work.
something completely different. How did you come to that? To
I enjoy writing. Once I can put everything else around me that's going on out of my head and sit down and looking at, the first book I've written 3 books before Desperate Measures that are still in a drawer, and they'll probably stay there forever. But they were all longhand and notebooks. Then I
Mm.
switched over to computer and just sitting there. And then once I can get a first sentence down and start, and then it just starts to come out
Is it like watching a movie for
in
you?
my head. Yes, very much. And then I basically just describing what I'm seeing in my head.
A lot of authors I've talked to have said that, and something I've also heard from authors is that sometimes the author has ideas about what should be going on, but the characters have their own ideas
Yes, that
and they
actually
take
happens.
control.
That happens. Yes.
Uh, I suppose
Worst example of that is Max, the father in my book. Things that came up that were the character doing them. It felt like it wasn't my idea for some of the, especially the more horrible things that he did. They just happened. And so I just went along with it and then made him quite
well,
a
what,
despicable person.
what a great authors have got. I remember this is a very early thought I had when probably I was 7 or 8 years old, and it was about books and movies, and I think I was taken to my first live stage play, and I thought to myself, God, this is a I didn't think, oh, this is a godlike ability, but this is the ability to create people and worlds, to bring to life people and
Yes.
worlds that
It's
didn't
fun.
exist. It is, but so I want to pivot to, I know, everybody's favorite question.
Sure.
When authors write a book and they create a world, they create people in it. So if you could live in a book or visit a book, and I know you read horror and thrillers, what book would you like to live in or visit?
Well, I mentioned to you earlier, we were talking, and yeah, that lots of the authors I read, they're very good at describing the scenery and stuff and the setting of the place. And a lot of those I love, but once the meat of the story comes out, you really don't want to be there. And I had a really hard time with this, thinking about this question, trying to, and what I came up with is, given where we are right now in the world and everything going on, is wouldn't be living in a Beatrix Potter novel be really nice right now?
Going into a Beatrix Potter book, yeah, it would be charming.
Yes, with maybe a little Anne Rice thrown in, Interview with a Vampire.
And a vampire bunny in all of it, kind
I
of like the
loved the
Wallace
answer
and
of one of
Gromit, the
your
werebunny.
other guests answered that, and it was actually one that I had thought of, but I can't use that, but
What was it?
it was the Tales of the City. I love that.
It's
I didn't read all of them, but I started them, and it was, yeah, oh, this is what a wonderful world to live in.
it's interesting. I should have a scoreboard on my wall with how many times people have said, I mean, we don't interview just LGBT people, but
Right, yeah.
it's been predominantly that, it's a very common thread that people say Tales of the City. And I think it's because Armistead Maupin created a space that had a little intrigue and danger, but it was
Yes,
cozy and
yes,
supportive. And the characters had a relationship with each other. So it was, in a way, it was a very much idealized
yes, absolutely.
place, which is why I think a lot of LGBT people can relate to that work because, if it's Choice of Living in Pit in the Pendulum by Poe, or visiting, I think it was Russian Hill, Barbary Lane I think it was Russian Hill
Yeah, I
in
think so.
San Francisco. I'd much rather go to Barbary Lane than
Yes,
to the mansion
hands down.
in the Pit in the Pendulum.
And I've never been to San Francisco, but yes, yes, absolutely.
You've never been to San Francisco?
No. Well, I've only been through California briefly, driving through from Colorado, visiting friends in Oregon, then driving back to Alaska.
I don't know. The authorities, the LGBT Politburo might come asking for your gay card back.
I've been to New York a lot. Does that count?
My hometown.
And my husband and I were married in Provincetown, Massachusetts.
There you go. So you get additional points on your gay
Yes,
card. So what are you working on now? Are you working on a new book?
I am. I'm working on two. One I'm actually working on, another one that I'm just kind of working on in my head, which is actually a sequel to Desperate Measures. But the one that I'm actually working on now it's a standalone, straight up horror. But it takes place in Alaska, which I miss a lot. I haven't been up there in 20 years, but I lived there for 14 years and still think about it all the time, especially on hot, humid days here. Because hot days there are 75 degrees, and
And is this also a horror thriller?
yes, yeah. I can't say a whole lot about it because I just can't.
No, that's okay. I'm sure your publisher will be very interested once it's completed. Well, Michael, it's been delightful. I think you're our first horror writer on the
I'm honored.
show. So you have that esteemed position as being the first horror writer. But I want to thank you for joining us. And
Thank you so
again,
much.
yeah, it's been delightful. Maybe we could chat again. So for everybody out there, we've been in conversation with Michael Reed. He is the author of Desperate Measures. You can read about the characters, Rhonda and Joey, who are running away from the abusive Max and take shelter in a dark, snowy woods in a creepy old cabin that's inhabited by Ida, and out in the woods, something else is lurking. And I want to remind everybody to please hit the subscribe and follow, because that really helps us, and it helps in these world of algorithms that we live in today. We were all being reduced to formulas. It helps to surface our show to more readers. So again, thank you, Michael.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Bold Voices, Good Yarns, brought to you by Rattling Good Yarns Press. Subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube, and follow us on social media. Search for Rattling Good Yarns Press. Also, visit our website at rattlinggoodyarns.com, where you can find great reads and interesting articles about the world of books. See you soon!